Are you looking to get ready, be prepared, and transform your financial future? Then you've come to the right place. This is the Get Ready Money Podcast with Tony Stewart, where Tony has insightful conversations with financial experts who are changing the way we think about money. Catch up on the latest financial trends and hear practical advice from Tony and his expert guests so you can build healthy habits that work. Be empowered with tips for implementing small changes that can have a big impact on your financial future. So sit back and get ready to hear from today's guest.
Welcome to the Get Ready Money Podcast, changing the way we think about money. I'm pleased to be joined today by Micah Autry. Micah is a professional speaker, podcast host, author, and entrepreneur. In this episode, we'll be discussing Micah's thoughts on how we change the way we think about money and achieving success in our life. Micah, welcome to the Get Ready Money Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to jump into it and talk all things finances.
Fantastic. Well, let's get down to it. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story?
Yeah, so my origin story, I'm from the sunny side of Houston, Texas. Sunnyside is the neighborhood in which I grew up. However, there wasn't anything sunny about Sunnyside. Sunnyside is the sixth worst neighborhood in the country in regards to poverty and crime rate. Grew up in a single parent household, and we were blessed to always have a roof over our head. However, we always struggled financially. There was always some financial trauma in there, whether that's an eviction notice or the lights getting turned off or cell phones getting turned off, or, hey, you got food on the table, but maybe that's not necessarily the food that you want as a kid. So all of those things we struggled with growing up. And one of the things that I realized once I got a little older, I didn't learn the word equity until I was 19. Growing up, we didn't own any of the homes or apartments we lived in, didn't own the cars that we drove. Even some of the consumer electronics that we had, didn't own those either. TVs, they were, rented and leased to own, things like that. And so when I was in high school, got to college, I was like, hey, I want to own my own stuff. And that's why I chose entrepreneurship. I own my own equipment, I own equity in the company. And that really started me on this financial literacy, this financial wellness journey through equity, ownership, and having control over my finances.
Well, that's great. That's an inspiring story. And, it's hard for, I know probably a lot of my listeners or viewers to, understand that because, a lot of us are born more fortunate. So, with that as a paradigm, do you think some of that, I know you do some work for individuals of color. Do you think that there was maybe not a bias built into the system, but that, that it might have been a little bit different, in terms of financial literacy and financial wellness, that you were a little bit further behind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a descendant of a slave. I consider myself to be Black American. My grandmother, who just passed away in February at the age of 87, her grandparents were enslaved, especially here in Texas.
Wow.
Anybody who understands the Juneteenth holiday, the slaves in Galveston, Texas, where I grew up 45 minutes from, were the last slaves to be freed. And so because of some of those, I don't want to say some of those, but because, you're starting the race so far behind, it's harder to catch up. My grandmother grew up on the farm. My grandmother literally was picking cotton and eggs and things of that nature just to put, help her family, she was one of seven, put food on the table. She was able to move to the big city, but still was in the big city doing Jim Crow. And then, once she was able to have kids, my mother went to a 90% white high school in 1980. Right. So you're still dealing with all of these systemic and systematic issues in regards to race, privilege, and financial literacy. And, she has us. I'm a first generation college student. So I'm definitely picking up the pieces and running a race, starting a little bit behind some of my peers. And I don't want to make it simply black and white, because I know peers of mine who grew up in the North, who families were a little bit further ahead than my family who grew up in the South. So yeah, you definitely got to understand the story in totality to understand, okay, first generation college student, but you're fifth, 5 or 6 generations in, why that may have been the case. But I definitely think it stems from some of the foundations our country was built on when it comes to slavery, prejudice, the lack of literacy, just being able to read, things of that nature.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We could probably, I'm sure we could spend the whole episode
Oh yeah.
going into that. But but I think it's important for people to remember if you feel challenged in your own personal financial life, is that maybe put it in perspective.
Hmm.
That wherever you're starting from, that there's not much you can do about it. It's about the moves you make going forward, and I think that's your story as well.
Yeah, when I go and do public speaking, my favorite quote to say is, "You're not a product of your environment. You're a product of how you respond to your environment." My professional speaking coach, a gentleman by the name of Chris Singleton, talks about how 10% of your life you can't control. You can't control the neighborhood you grow up. You can't control your skin tone. You can't control the name you're born with. You can't control your parents or whatever financial situation that they bestowed upon you. But you do have the other 90% to change it. Now, I understand. I got to work a little harder, right? It's a relay race, and maybe I got to run with two batons, right? I got to run the race twice, and I can't change that. But I do have that 90% to be able to make decisions based upon how I want to respond to an environment, as opposed to I am simply subjected to whatever the environment was that I was brought up in, especially when it comes to finances.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, and I think that's such a powerful message and takeaway for people is that there's so many things that you can't change that you can worry about what you do going forward and worry about those things you can change. I think the only thing I would say with your list is you can't change your name.
You can change it. Yes, yes. That's why I always say the name you're born with, right? The name you're born with.
Well, I
You
like
got to
that.
take
You got me
leadership
on
of
that
it.
one.
Yeah, yeah. The name you're born with. Absolutely.
So I love that. So, I mean, you've probably already partially answered this, but, I want to ask you is, what particularly inspired you to make this your journey to help individuals of color achieve professional success, health, and wealth?
It's just what I see every single day. And it starts with wanting to help the people that are closer to me, friends, family, loved ones, and then it branches out from there. I personally think through academics, first generation college student, I love to read books, as you can see behind me. I've wrote a book. I love that self education. Through professionalism, starting the company, understanding the game of corporate America, understanding the game of we live in a capitalistic society. You got to be able to make money and play the game. If you don't want to play the game, that's a totally different topic for a different podcast. But we live in a capitalist society. You got to learn how to play the game, be professional. And then the third thing was just that financial literacy. So for me, I believe I've been able to change my life and hopefully change the course of my family's life, breaking those generational curses through education, professionalism, and financial literacy. So I've been able to curate all of this from experiential knowledge and from self education. I just want to go give it back to everybody else because I see how much of an impact it's had on my life.
That's awesome. That's powerful. And I think that's the best thing you can do with your knowledge is to pass it on to others instead of
Absolutely.
keeping it for yourself. And one of the things you said that particularly resonates for me is that when you mentioned that it's a game and it's understanding the rules, is whether or not, I think for some people they may say, well, it's not really a game. But I think what you're saying is, it's understanding the rules of whatever you want to call it so you can be successful. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah, I think I'll push back. It's absolutely a game. It's, especially here in America, we're in a capitalistic society. Mark Cuban, who I'm here in Dallas, so I love Mark Cuban, been able to meet him a couple of times. He says business is the ultimate game. The game of business, the game of money, the game of life. It's a infinite game as well. So I don't think there's very many rules, right? There are some rules and laws of the land in which we live. So if you step out of those rules, there will be consequences, right? But for the most part, for example, the way that you keep score and how you impact people in life. Maybe you keep score monetarily. A lot of people keep score by the amount of zeros they have in a bank account, but someone else may keep score by the impact that they have on others. Some people may keep score by the raising of their offspring, of their children. So that's life, right? You're going to judge how successful you are based upon your own your own metric. So it's not any set of rules per se, but I think we do have to get up every day, take action in this ecosystem that we live in. Because, like I said, you live in a capitalist society, so money is important, business is important, taking action is important.
100%. And I think you said something there that I want to emphasize is, judge your life by your own metrics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I think sometimes people worry too much about what other people are doing rather than, like, hey, is this making me happy? An example that I like to use is, Warren Buffett, who, he lives in the same house he bought in 1958. I think he bought it
Yeah.
for like, I can't remember, like $35,000 or something. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
he could probably afford an upgrade if he wanted, but
Oh yeah.
so, amazing. So let's talk about your book. You mentioned it. Tell us a little bit about your book, Dorm Life to Work Life, and how it can help college graduates.
Yeah, so the book is a book that I wrote by accident. I was giving public speaking presentations over bridging the gap between millennial, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and baby boomers and Gen X. So I was writing a book about bridging the gap between young people and the more seasoned professionals, right? Because I always felt I was kind of the middle child. I had my own company, but I was working with generations that were older, but I was managing generations that were younger. So I wrote this book to help make that transition from being in the dorm room to being in the work arena based upon my experiences. I say I wrote the book by accident because I was doing these public speaking presentations and I read a quote by Jeff Bezos. We all know Jeff Bezos, Amazon, and he talked about you don't really know content for a presentation if you're only putting on PowerPoint slides. You need to write it out verbatim in prose form. When you write out a couple of presentations verbatim in prose form, you end up having 30, 40, 50,000 words. Is what I had. And I was like, I should probably turn this into a book and continue to help people. And that's kind of how it came about.
That's awesome. And I think that's such an important topic. I recently did a talk to a group of college students, who are about, it was fully focused on financial literacy, but it's amazing how these people, even if they don't go to college, they go from high school and they're jumping into work life and all of a sudden they're expected to know all these things, but it's like, where do you find them? So I'm glad you wrote that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think young people. I'm biased. I love young people. I think in terms of skills, they are more skills than we are. I know a gentleman making 5 figures a month using TikTok and Shopify, and he's like 19. So they're extremely skilled. It's the soft skills, right? Whether we say, hey, it was a byproduct of Corona, or whether it's the byproduct of just being an information age, right? We're all on technology, we're all on social media, we're not having these interpersonal connections anymore. That's where I feel like a lot of people are lacking. And so for me, I wrote the book. I'm like, hey, here are these soft skills that I've learned. You add that to the hard skills you already have, you can take over the world.
Yeah, it's definitely, and I'm sure we could even, go back to, what we were talking about with rules and say they're almost rules in some respect, this is sort of what's going to change. So, let's switch gears here for a second, Micah, and get into the get ready questions.
Okay, let's do it.
So the first one is, what basic money concept do you wish people knew?
One basic concept I wish people knew, that you can't earn and save your way to wealth, in my opinion. I think you have to stop trading your time for a dollar. Time is a finite resource. It's the most valuable thing that we got, and it's very limited. And we are so spread thin with it, with family obligations, with community obligations, with job obligations, that if we only trade that time for money to be able to build wealth exponentially, it's going to be really hard. So we have to figure out ways to invest, make our money work for us, gain equity, things of that nature.
Yeah, I love that. I was just making a note how to make our money work for us, because I think that's powerful for people to understand that you have to find that balance.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause some people are going to trade time for money, but it's like, okay, you can still split the difference and have some of your money working for you, that it's not always a either or proposition, but, transition as much as you can.
And the last thing I'll say to that, it's also because I still trade time for money, whether it's professionally speaking, whether it's my video production company, but I do try to find things that are higher leverage and that it's not a direct correlation of money for time. For example, when I first started my video production company, I'm like, okay, well, I'm $50 an hour to film. right? Now I'm saying, okay, for a 4-day rate, we're $3,000, right? Because we have higher leverage. Or instead of charging per hour for edit, it's like, hey, if you want this type of video, you got to give us $1,000 because I may be able to do it in 30 minutes. Someone else may be able to do it in 4 hours. They shouldn't get paid more. I should get paid more because I have the expertise to be able to do it more efficiently. So just changing that mindset around how we are valuing ourselves and not just by the hour, but by our expertise, I think will make a big difference as well.
Yeah, by our expertise. Sorry, you're saying so much great stuff rather than by our. Well, and I think that's an important lesson for people because I know even when I was doing consulting, I often struggled with like, okay, well, how much do I charge per hour, rather than, charging per project? And I think
Per project,
that's
yeah.
a mindset. And I think that's the hard thing for people is because, it's one thing to say, stop trading time for dollars. But what I love is that you have a really crystal clear way of doing that. And I think that's what people struggle with is they go, okay, well, I hear all these great things and it makes sense. Like, well, how do I actually do it?
Yep.
I love it. So what is one simple thing you can do each year to set yourself up for financial success?
Tracking your net worth. One of the things, well, I was going to say net worth is one of those things I didn't understand that concept, know that term or anything until I'm 19, 20, 21 years old. I remember the first time I had $10,000 in positive net worth, right? After you knock out all the student loan, all the consumer debt, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, okay, well, I'm getting somewhere now. I can build upon this. So once or twice a quarter, I look at my net worth. I reevaluate how much the real estate properties are that I have. I go and look at, hey, what do I have in this stock? It goes up and down like crazy, especially right now. But what do I have in this stock market? What do I have in cryptocurrency? And it really just gives me an overall picture, in my opinion, of my money health, right? It's like going to the doctor and getting that wellness checkup to understand, okay, this is your blood pressure. These are the things that you need to do to maybe course correct if it's a little high, right? And so having that idea of your net worth, understanding how many assets you got, how much money you got versus what your debt is, I think give you a very good picture on where you are, and then you can focus on where you're going.
Definitely. And I love that because, I sort of refer to it as car dashboard is, you can see if there's any changes, if there's a problem with your oil, like let's say you're taking on too much debt, you can adjust it. But if you're not looking at it, it's hard to know. So
yeah. What we pay attention to gets better.
Exactly. Squeak wheel gets the grease off. So
yeah.
So Micah, what is one habit that people can change when it comes to their money?
One habit: not making purchases and money decisions based upon emotion. Finances, money, whatever we want to call it, is a very emotionally charged topic, in my opinion. I start making these YouTube videos about finances, like, hey, don't buy that car, like buy a cash car, or maybe we should downsize and get roommates. I had roommates for 9 years, and people feel so personally attacked when you start talking about what they're doing with their wallets. And so, in my opinion, some of the best things that I've done financially, for example, was have roommates for 9 years. From the age of 18 to 27, I never paid more than $650 in rent. You know how well that sets you up financially, right? And then you also have a car that's paid off at that same time. But I was able to make that sacrifice because I wasn't thinking emotionally, right? I wasn't saying, okay, I can go get this $2,000 a month, 1-bedroom apartment because it looks cool, or because it's going to make me feel good, or, hey, I'm an adult, I have my own place. I was thinking logically. And how I define logic is making decisions that's going to help me get towards my goal. And my goal was to be able to buy an investment property every year. My goal was to have $1 million net worth by the time I turned 30. Those are my financial goals. Having $2,000 a month in rent and having a $700 car note was not going to help me get to those goals. So I was able to make the sacrifice to have roommates for 9 years to help me get closer towards those goals. So I think if there's one habit that I would tell people to change, is making those financial decisions based upon emotion. Start making them based upon logic to get you closer to the goals that you set for yourself.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And it reminds me of what you were talking about earlier is, setting your own rules and making your own metrics. Because for a lot of people, they're going to say, well, I don't really want roommates. Well, and neither one is good or bad. It's, whatever works for you. But I
Good
think
for
the
you. Yeah.
key that you said is that there's a trade-off.
Yes.
Is so you don't want a roommate. Well, that's okay, but you have to understand that that's going to impact you somewhere else, and
Hmm.
it's got to make that change. So I
Yeah.
love it.
For
Great
every input,
advice.
there's an output.
Exactly.
Yep. Yep.
Exactly. Every action, reaction.
Yep.
So what money myth are you trying to break?
What money myth am I trying to break? I would say the idea that you have to become or you have no choice but to become those around you. Maybe your parents weren't great with money. Maybe you come from disadvantaged socioeconomic circumstances. Only because you come from those environments doesn't mean you have to succumb to those environments. As I said earlier, we're not a product of our environment, we're a product of how we respond. We see it all the time. There are plenty of people who grow up disadvantaged financially who do extremely well, right? But then you also see people who may inherit a lot of money or athletes who get $1 million contract at 19 and then they no longer have that money. So it's not really the environment, right? It's the way that they responded to it. So I just want people to understand that we do have choice when it comes to controlling our finances.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely, and it's disheartening when it goes either way, as people think that I can't do that. I this is where I come from. These are my resources now. Or you see an athlete that loses all their money, and it really gets back to one, the metrics that you were talking about, two, understanding the rules of the game, and three, is getting out there and learning something.
Mm-hmm.
And that you also have to be proactive, in
Yes.
my mind, in seeking out the knowledge that it's just not going to come to you usually how to do these things. You have to learn,
Yep.
and be open to learning. So
Absolutely. 100%.
yeah, so Micah, let's get out the time machine.
Okay.
What advice would you give your younger self if you could go back in time knowing what you know now?
Yeah, this one may be a little controversial. However, I do video production. So I was doing videos for a law firm. I was talking to the two managing partners of this law firm. They do wrongful death and serious injury law. And I asked them, hey, what makes you get into this field of law? And they were both saying, hey, we wanted to get into law. One of them talked about wanting to potentially go to medical school, but hey, I wasn't really smart enough when it came to the math and sciences. So I went to the law profession. But they went into the law profession and specifically serious injury because they knew the type of lifestyle that they wanted. They knew the type of wealth they wanted to accumulate for them and their families. And they made a choice on their schooling. They made a choice on their career path. They made a choice on the actions that they would take to be proactive to get that future self that they wanted in regards to their wealth and finances. For me, I went to school based more upon feeling, which is nothing wrong with that. It was, hey, I like this media stuff. I think it's cool. It's the last thing that I did in high school was one of my last electives. Like, let me go to college for that. However, I started getting exposed to different ways of life. And I'm like, okay, well, I want my income, my wealth, my financial wellness to look like this. However, incoming jobs as a media professional is $45,000. Those are a big disconnect. And if I could go back and tell my younger self something, it would be, hey, establish the type of life that you want in the future. What do you want your finances to look like? What type of wealth do you want to accumulate to break generational curses for your family? What type of things do you want to do financially? And then be able to dictate what you do professionally based upon where you want to go with your finances. Maybe a little bit of a controversial take, but if I had to do it over again, I definitely would, because now as I approach my 30s, I think about where I'm going to trade my time and money and what's going to give me the most leverage to get the type of life I want financially.
Yeah, and that's great advice. I just know. So my son is 18. He's in college, and giving him that type of advice Yeah, I think if I could go back, that'd be great advice for myself. But it's hard to give somebody 18 years old that type of advice. I
Yep.
mean,
Yep.
but it's
I try to tell all
wonderful.
my
So,
I was gonna say I try to tell all my nieces and nephews. I have 7 nieces and nephews. I don't have any children of my own. But I'm like, hey, what do you think about coding? What do you think about IT? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Because they all want to do, video production and content creation like their uncle, which is fine. I've been able to make a living for it. But hey, what type of life do you want? Right? You want a bigger house than mine? You want to have more impact to donate to your community than I do? Well, hey, maybe we do different professions as well. So I try to, but like you say, when you're talking to an 18-year-old who are, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed and want to go to the big university to go to football games, it may be hard to get them to think about, should I do medicine, coding, or law versus, content creation.
exactly, it's just not as much fun. But I mean, and that's a whole other topic. Is that sort of mismatch between our educational system and reality
Yep.
of what they're going to be doing when they get to college
Yes. Yes.
or high school.
Yep.
So, to start to wrap up, what is your number one tip on changing the way we think about money?
Number one tip. Oh, I have a couple. If I could say two, if that's okay.
Of course.
Uh, and we've covered both of them a little bit. The first thing is, to your point earlier, proactive self education. Everything that I learned about money, I would literally say everything that I've learned about money came through some form of self education, whether that was reading books, watching podcasts, going to conferences, finding someone who had a financial life that I wanted to emulate and asking them questions. Unfortunately, traditional schooling taught me nothing that I currently use and apply to my financial life. Traditional schooling taught me none of it. And unfortunately, my family taught me none of it. They didn't understand brokerage accounts, investments, real estate. They didn't understand that. Those weren't even terms that we heard. So everything that I've learned has been through self-education. And then the second thing I would say is understanding gratification. I believe we have to redefine and delay gratification. When I say redefining gratification, I was a big gamer. I love the game. I still like to buy sneakers, but I bought a lot more sneakers when I was younger. But that's just to feel good. You're feeling voids. You're doing these things to make you feel good. But you could also get that same dopamine hit of gratification through seeing that little ticker on the stock market go up, right? Or signing the papers when we're buying another rental property. I got that same gratification that I would if I would have bought the sneakers or bought the new Range Rover or bought this or bought that, right? So that's the first thing, redefining the gratification. And then the second thing is delaying the gratification. The sacrifices that I made when I was 18, 19, 20, starting a business, no partying, no this, no that, saving money, being extremely frugal, right? When I was 19, 20, 21, having roommates for 9 years, I'm able to reap the benefits of those seeds that were planted through delayed gratification when I'm 30. And hey, if I don't want to work this week, I don't necessarily have to. I have an established business. I have multiple streams of income coming in, but all of that is a byproduct of the sacrifices that I made when I was 20, 21, 22, etc.
That's powerful. And I think you just said something there too, multiple streams of income that I
Yeah.
want to emphasize, because I think that's important for people to start to think about is, whatever that means for you, is that it's good to have more than one source of income if you can, so you're not wholly dependent upon that. So that's an important thing. And I think it comes around to some of what you're talking about, to which we're very first starting to talk about with your origin story, is that, you in your background and in your family, you guys didn't talk about stocks and you
Mm-hmm.
didn't talk about investments just because that
You don't
wasn't
know
part
what
of
you
your
don't know?
parents. Yeah. So how are your parents going to teach you something that they don't know themselves? So, so it's important for us to all be self-starters with our education and
Yeah, and
challenge ourselves.
the one point I'll say to that, being able to teach your kids about stocks, how are you going to teach something that you don't know? I think for anyone who may have grown up in a similar situation that I was in, or currently in a similar socio economic uh, state that's disadvantaged, I would say we have to get to survival as quick as possible. You can't focus on thriving if you're focusing on surviving. And for years, my mom is just focusing on surviving. We're just focusing on keeping the lights on. We're just focusing on making sure the kids get to school and that the bills are paid and the cars don't get towed. We're just focusing on survival. We can never think about thriving. We can never think about another stream of income or how to be better with our finances or how to save or how to invest when we're simply surviving and staying afloat. So as quick as you can, get to surviving, get those bills on auto pay, get that one stream of income that's going to be able to keep the lights on. And as soon as you get to survival, then we can focus on thriving. But there's so many individuals that I still know personally that we're still just trying to survive, that we can never focus on thriving.
Yeah, and that's tough. When you have people who are, I guess, on a treadmill, where it's, you make just enough to pay the rent, buy the groceries, maybe get some clothes, and it's like, and there's people who can't cut back at that point. They're already cut back, so it's like, then maybe it's like, I don't know, can you pick up extra income? I mean, I don't know. What would you say to those people, who are, right there at the survival? It's like, how do you start to move the needle a little bit?
Yeah, I read a book called The One Thing. And even when I'm thinking about, finding a wife, right? Or when you're thinking about making a move from Texas to California, whatever that may be, any type of major transition in your life, there's one thing. There's one thing that you can do that can get you off that treadmill. You may fall on your face when you do that one thing. It may hurt, it may suck, but it's that one thing. And when I say that, people will think about that one thing. And even though you're on the treadmill, you're just making enough for rent, you're, taking care of the kids, you're buying the groceries, you're doing all of that. But, when you have 2 hours of free time from 7 to 9, what do? Do you watch Netflix? Do you play the video game? Do you drink alcohol, right? What are you doing in just those 2 hours? Just those 2 hours. What's that hour and a half look like? Or, okay, maybe you slept 8.5 hours. Could I do one thing and sleep 6.5 hours, wake up 2 hours earlier? What could you do in that 2 hours? Just one thing. Just one thing I think will help you get off the treadmill. Now, you may fall off the treadmill. You may get some carpet burn, but that's going to be your way of getting off. So I think you got to figure out what that one thing is that's going to get you off the treadmill. And it's going to hurt and it's going to suck. And it's going to be hard to stay consistently consistent because you're going to want to hop back on that treadmill. And whatever you stop doing, that one thing is, okay, I'm done playing video games. I'm going to dedicate this 1 hour of free time to learning about money. You're going to go back and play the video game. That's human nature. We're going to quote unquote relapse to whatever that one thing is. That's okay. You just need to fall back off the treadmill again, right? And do it enough until you build a new habit, until you redefine what gratifies you, right? And I think that's what it is. You got to figure out what that one thing is. It's going to hurt really bad, but I think you just got to do it. And for me, I use the video game method. I use the video game example because that's one of the things that I gave up. I haven't played video games in like 4 or 5 years. I was a huge gamer, multiple hours a day. And I was like, okay, cold turkey, this is not getting me to where I want to be financially. I'm just going to stop the video games. I'm just going to throw them away. And I'm going to come over here and look at Fidelity. I'm going to come over here and read this book by Simon Sinek or by Robert Kiyosaki. Like, I'm going to go do that. And it sucked and it hurts. But you reap the reward in the future.
Yeah, unfortunately, like they say in working out, no pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain.
Unfortunately, you do have to pay, for success. Yeah. But I think that's powerful advice, is to find that one thing, because I think that's something that people miss, is that you think you have to make these huge changes. And if you can start to make one small change, one small step, that will lead to your next step. And then your next step. And then you've got the big change. Yep. But what is it saying? Every journey starts with, I can't remember what it is, but, every journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. Something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know exactly. That sounds close. That sounds close enough.
Well, we'll close with that. So, Micah, where can people learn more about you, keep up with your work, pick up a copy of Dorm Life to Work Life, and just generally what you're up to?
Yeah. So you can visit my website, which is dirmicahautrey.com, or follow me on all social media, YouTube, Instagram, all that good stuff, TikTok, at Secrets of Silent Success, which is also the name of my podcast.
Sweet. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate your time and your insights.
No problem. I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Definitely. And everyone, thank you as always for tuning in to the Get Ready Money podcast. Please remember to subscribe and to change the way you think about money. Until next time.